Say it again? Oh, okay. Before the meeting begins, I'm going to ask our interpreters to provide instructions on how to use the interpretation feature.
Announcement from interpreter. To use the interpretation feature, please scroll to the bottom of the Zoom screen where the meeting controls are. Click on the interpretation icon, world, and select English as your language. If you are joining through the Zoom mobile app, cell phone, tablet, etc., please press the ellipsis, then interpretation, and then choose your language. Finally, click on mute original audio to not hear the original Spanish low in the background. Headsets are available for interpretation. If you are in the meeting room, please check out a headset from the receptionist in the lobby. Aviso por parte del intérprete. Para hacer uso del servicio de interpretación, favor de desplazarse a la parte inferior de la pantalla de Zoom, donde aparecen los controles. Haga clic en el icono de interpretación, globo terráqueo, y seleccione Spanish, español. Si está utilizando la aplicación móvil de Zoom, celular, tableta, etc., presione los puntos suspensivos, luego interpretación y luego el idioma. Si no desea escuchar el audio original en inglés en el fondo, por favor seleccione Mute Original Audio, silenciar audio original. Contamos con auriculares disponibles para el servicio de interpretación. Si se encuentra en la sala de reunión, favor de pedir auriculares con la recepcionista en el vestíbulo. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm Steve Goebel, Deputy Mayor of the City of El Cajon, and I'll be kicking off today's meeting, calling the meeting to order of this September 9th, 2024 Military Working Group meeting. Would you all take a moment and stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, before we go further, I'd like to ask Tessa, we have a quorum for today's meeting.
Good morning, Chair. We do have a quorum.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, before we begin with our agenda items, I'd like to review the meeting process for both the working group members as well as the members of the public who wish to participate. The amount of time for each verbal public comment will be limited to 1 minute, 2 minutes. And this will allow us to hear from as many people as possible while letting us conduct the business while we still have a quorum. In order to speak on any agenda item, members of the public will need to submit a speaker slip for each agenda item in advance, and the virtual public will need to raise their hand in the Zoom platform. For working group members, just please raise your hand and I'll call on you for that. So before we continue with agenda items, do any members or the public, I'll start with members of the public, Tessa, do they have any non-agenda comments?
Thank you. I have 2 members of the public with non-agenda public comments. Cesar Javier, please come to the podium. You'll be followed by Purita Javier.
Welcome.
Good morning. Supervisor Rosales, City Treasurer Office declared that her office collects fees.
Sorry.
Right there.
Yes.
Thank you, SANDAG. I am Purita A. Javier, victim of toxicity since 1997, and my husband, Cesar B. Javier, beginning in 2012 from Next Door Ceramics Manufacturing and Kel Industrial Home Business since 1984, owned and operated by Donald J. Fraser and wife Evelyn Fraser, located at 5238 Streamview Drive, San Diego, California 92105, and situated in a residential zone designated community. Science through research and studies explains that hazards in ceramics are air contaminants and airborne particulates from firing sounds, and even toxic dust when inhaled and or ingested and will cause sneezing, coughing, watery eyes, dizziness, irregular headache, irregular heart palpitation, which we both experienced in the past, even now when they fire the oven makeshift. Fear lures because it leads to asthma, other respiratory disease, lung cancer.
Scout Cesar Javier, warrior of climate change, community located Cholas Creek, District 9, an area of responsibility where we have self-imposed ourselves to be guardian for clean and safe neighborhood. The police responded and they said, close your windows and build a wall. They cannot investigate because it has permit from the city. You go to the treasurer's office, you pay, you apply your paper, sign it, and pay $38, you can go business, poisoning the air we breathe in our community. As we go house to house to amplify this issue, we came across the demography in our community. We have predominantly Asian Americans, Vietnamese, Lao, Cambodian, Chinese, name it. And they are surprised why the city approved the location, approved the construction, approved the operation. Free will, no regulatory standard based on the Municipal Code Rule 11, ceramic kiln exempt, whether it is wood, gas, or electric fuel. The question is, why they did allow poisoning the air we breathe in a designated residential zone? There must be something wrong because this is national security, sir. We
Sir,
have
your time
people
has
here
expired.
suffering since 19.
Thank you, sir. Your time has expired. And Chair, that does conclude the public comments on this item.
Until some, because you are there in the Southeast Asia.
Great. Thank you for taking the time to come down and share your thoughts this morning. We appreciate it. Okay, moving on to item number 1 is the chair's report. It's not shown on your agenda, but it's shown on my paper, so we'll go to the chair's report. Before we do that, because that is an agenda item, Tessa, do we have any public comments on the chair's report?
There are no public comments.
Okay, thank you. A couple of items for you to note. I'm pleased to announce that Mario Orso has been appointed the new CEO of SANDAG. He started on June 17th, so almost 3 months on the job now. While we were expecting Mariella to take over the military working group liaison this meeting, I think if you remember, we had some changes April and some of her staff moved on to some other groups. Mariella is going to join us, but she's been needed on the Committee on Binational Regional Opportunities. And for those of you in government who need one more acronym in your language, it's COBRO, C-O-B-R-O. While she's coordinating that group, Danielle will be the liaison for the military working group with support from Kate McCauley. So we will still see Mariella due to her role in the Harbor 2.0 project. Third item is Clean Air Day. It's coming up on Wednesday, October 2nd. It's a statewide annual event. In San Diego, all MTS and NCTD services include bus, trolley, and coaster rides will be free to everyone October 2nd in the region. You can take a pledge to participate on SANDAG's website and commit to actions that will contribute to cleaner air for our community. So October 2nd, free transit day on MTS and NCTD. Hopefully the Padres are in the playoffs that day and everybody can take transportation free to a playoff game. That would be wonderful. You are also invited to join SANDAG for a more free stuff, 5-mile guided bike ride through downtown San Diego on Sunday, September 22nd. It should be cooler. The tour will depart from the Bike Coalition's office at 11 a.m. and return around 12:30. The ride's a family-friendly design for people of all ages and abilities and will be led by certified instructors from the San Diego County Bicycle Coalition. That's a good group. Show up early for a free bike check. All right, now we're going to continue on with, we've done public comment for non-agenda. We're going to go on to item number. Oh, okay. Any non-agenda comments that working group members want to make? JJ.
Good morning, all. Good morning, Chair. So I'm pleased to announce the Department of Navy in the state of California on the 30th of August signed a 25-year lease for the San Onofre State Park Beach aboard Camp Pendleton. So that footprint remains in effect as it has for generations over the last 53 years for Californians to enjoy.
Nice. Like the continuity. Thank you. Anyone else? Tony, we'll start with you and work down the way, down the mic.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Tony Winnie, City of Coronado. Just wanted to provide a quick update on cross-border water quality. This is an issue that Coronado has been engaged in for many years now, along with other cities here in the region. So, but a number of things have happened of late. So as you recall, last Congress, they allocated an additional $200 million for repairs to the IBWC plant, which is on the U.S. side of the border. We are in DC this week. We have 2 council members there today through Thursday advocating for additional funding for repairs to that plant. All told, it's going to require about $1 billion. So, and we have about $600 million allocated so far. So more to come on that, but we are working collaboratively with our Congress to make sure that we've got additional funding coming our way on that front. Last week, our city council adopted an urgency resolution on this issue, like a number of different cities here in the region, to try and draw attention to what is really an environmental crisis. And so obviously IB is the greatest affected on this issue. They've been closed for more than 1,000 days at this point, or their beaches. So we are working with them and Chula Vista and the city of San Diego very closely to try and garner additional attention. And you'll notice that UT is devoting additional attention to this issue. So we're really happy about that. And then one other thing to note, so Mexico has been working on repairs to their plant, which is 7 miles south of the border. It's called Puta de Banderas plant. So they are actually having their military work on improvements to the plant, and it's scheduled to reopen next month if they meet their timelines. So we're really excited about that. That'll have a material impact in helping reduce the amount of sewage that's crossing the border and reaching San Diego. The second thing I wanted to mention is I had the pleasure of attending a ceremony at NASNY on base on Friday. So for those of you who are familiar with NASNY, if you go in the Stockdale gate, they've got a jet up on a pedestal to the left of the gate. So they have a volunteer group that's been hard at work, actually securing a helicopter so that they could refurbish that helicopter and dedicate it in the name of a prior service member who was a recipient of the National Medal of Honor. So there's not too many Navy members who are recipients of that medal. His name was Clyde Lassen. So they're going to dedicate that helicopter come January, but their volunteer group has secured the helicopter, refurbished it, and it is now in the process of being installed, and they'll be having a dedication ceremony in January. So it's very cool because NASNY is a master helicopter base. So they've got the jet. Now they'll also have the helicopter accompany that. So, and that completes my report. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
Chair Goebel and committee members, I'm Mike Wywoody. I'm the SDMAC representative, San Diego Military Advisory Council. We came to you 6 or 8 months ago with a presentation on our military economic impact report, which the SDMAC does every year. And at that time, the CEO of SDMAC was Mark Balmert. And so you welcomed us and added us as advisory members to this committee. Subsequently, Mark retired and an interim CEO, Paul Peregrine, came to our last meeting, so you met him. Well, now the real CEO is here, David Boone, who has just taken over, and David's background, a career in the Navy as a civil engineering corps, and then subsequent work in the construction business should be, I think, very complementary to the work of this committee. Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. David, welcome on behalf of the entire group. You've had a great career. Thank you for your leadership and wonderful to have you as part of this group. Want to say a couple words?
I'm glad to be here. I've been in the job 3 months and it's been fantastic collaborating with all the stakeholders across the city and county. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Welcome. Any other comments from anyone? Where? Oh, yes. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Mary Balderrama from North County Transit District. NCT service change is October 6th, which will include a slight reroute of Flex 392 in Kent Pendleton. Please contact NCT customer service with any service change requests. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mary. Anna.
Thank you. I'd like to invite my deputy Muska Like to come up and give just a very quick update on some of the programs we've been working on with the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Again, Muska Like, Deputy Regional Community Plans and Liaison Officer for Navy Region Southwest. I'm going to start with an update for Office of Local Defense and Community Cooperation, or OLDCC. They have provided a brief to the working group previously, but just to give you a quick recap, it is a field office within DoD, provides grant services to through various programs to local jurisdictions and state, and they do that for jurisdictions that have large military presence. And the goal is to lessen the burden and the impact of that military presence on those communities. So for fiscal year 24, their Defense Community Infrastructure Program announced their grantees. And one of the projects that was selected was in support of Naval Weapons Station Seal Beach, Detachment Fallbrook. And the project will provide a backup generator for the Fallbrook Public Utilities District. And this project will ensure that there is continued electricity services during extreme weather events. The project also helps our brothers and sisters at Marine Corps Camp Pendleton. So it is definitely a great project because it will benefit not only the Navy, but as well as Marine Corps. So we are very proud of that because we haven't seen a project that was picked for Navy Region Southwest in the past 3 or 4 years that I went back, because it is a very competitive program. So I'm very happy to announce that. Another update I want to provide is for Readiness and Environmental Protection Integration Program, or REPI. It is a program that is administered by Office of Secretary of Defense, and again, a competitive grant program. And they allow DoD to enter into mutual cost-sharing agreements with our partners to obtain restrictive use easements for conservation purposes, as well as natural resource management agreements via Sykes Act authority. So for fiscal year 25, we submitted 3 projects for Navy Region Southwest. And I want to highlight the Naval Base Coronado's project, which is in partnership with County of San Diego. The project will restore sensitive habitat species in Tijuana River Valley, and it will be protecting also a large area and this project is done with the County of San Diego. So it will be protecting the area that's owned by County of San Diego. And this will not only benefit the area, but also nullify B, because it will protect it against erosion, as well as the project will demolish some abandoned facilities in the area, which are currently used by transients for illegal purposes. So the project will ensure that the security of the area is enhanced, as well as make sure that there is no fire hazards because of these illegal activities. So the project was submitted for fiscal year 25. And we are hoping that it does get picked for grant this year because our fiscal year 24 similar project was funded by REPI, and this project just expands the previous year's project. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Muska. Any other comments? On behalf of MTS, we are having a new line, a new copper line, aren't we, Beverly? Want to say anything about that? I'll take it if you don't want to. I'm just giving you the opportunity. Okay. Excuse me. So MTS is introducing a new copper line. I think it's the first colored new line since, I don't know, a long time. And here's what's going to happen, because it does affect the military members who take the public transit, either the trolley or the bus system. Well, if the bus integrates with the trolley system. Currently, the green line terminates in Santee, and the orange line terminates at the Arnell station in El Cajon, which is just one station past the El Cajon Transit Center. Because there's a single track out in Santee, anytime there was a collision between a car and a trolley car, it threw off the whole rest of the system because, well, now we have to adjust. And so to make the whole system more reliable, both the orange line and the green line will terminate in El Cajon. And a new copper line will be a one-car train from El Cajon to Santee, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then the orange line and green line will terminate in El Cajon and be much more reliable all the way up to the northern part and the southern part. And that starts in 3 weeks, September 29th. Anything you want to add that I forgot? Okay. All right, thank you. So for those of your members who do take public transportation, more reliable transportation's on the way starting in 3 weeks. All right, let's move on to item number 2, which is the approval of the meeting minutes. Before we get into that, I'll check and see if there's any public comments. Tessa?
Thank you. There are no public comments on item 2, and I would like to remind the members that you do not have to have been present at the prior meeting to approve the minutes from that meeting.
That's a good point. If you weren't here, your vote essentially is attesting to the accuracy of those taking the minutes rather than whether you agree with the minutes or understand or were part of the discussions. So your vote, in my view, is that you attest to the accuracy of those taking the minutes. Do we have a motion to approve the minutes? Jim? Motion to
Second.
approve, second?
Second.
Second from Tony. All right, all those in favor, just a verbal vote, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? Great. Okay, that's item number 2. Let's move on to item number 3. I will talk a little more slowly while our staff moves to get set up at the back of the room. Item number 3 is the San Diego Regional Military Working Group Priority Project Inventory. With the discussion today, we're hoping to have to transition from the planning efforts towards implementation by developing a list of military working group projects. A lot of these things came up from our tours of your military installations around the county we did earlier in January. I got to tell you, that was the most impressive tour of each of your installations. It just as a member of the public, as a taxpayer, I have full confidence that if we ever need it, you guys are ready. You men and women are on the job. And if the public had a hint of how good you are at all these things, it would be amazing. So to see if there's any projects that came out of those tours, Danielle and Kate are all situated. I think I have stretched out my script enough to let you go ahead and take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for your slow comments and introduction. I appreciate it. So we're continuing on with this conversation at the last meeting. I'm glad many of you were there. We talked about, what we heard at the different tours. We talked about, some of those outcomes from the planning studies that we've completed recently, the military multimodal access strategy, the resilience strategy, and, bridging that gap between planning and implementation is really always kind of the challenge. So we know what we need to do from all these planning studies, and then we have grants that are available that, that would, SANDAG could apply to, our local jurisdictions can apply to, the DOD and the different installations can apply to. So as a group coming together to figure out what our priorities are, and having a list of projects or programs that we really want to prioritize as different opportunities become available. And I imagine that this list is something that's going to be live and iterative and changing over time. And so figuring out, how we want to prioritize projects for this group to really facilitate partnerships. And so I'm going to start with the military multimodal access strategy, give a quick overview here. And so this was done, I believe Natasha from SANDAG was here at the last meeting to give an overview, and she's really the expert on this. But we know that not Natasha. That was the resilience strategy. But the transit planning team actually led this effort a few years ago. And this, how it was done, it was back in 2019, and I took a really good look through this document, and Kate did as well, as we were trying to come up with an initial proposed list. And while a lot of best practice research was done, this report really looked at projects that were in our existing regional plan. Of course, we are on our second update to our long-range transportation plan since then. And so we do see changes in those projects, but it looked at that huge list of projects that we have and identified corridors that were important and critical and projects for our military communities. And then also looked at different strategies that could be implemented to facilitate multimodal access. We talk a lot about how, primarily because of, housing prices and whatnot, we have a lot of distribution and residents throughout the county, and people are commuting in all different directions, which makes it challenging to serve with public transit. And so looking at some of the other options and how we can really address those as needed. And so we had a few recommendations that came out of there. And one of those was for us to kind of look for these partnership opportunities to implement projects. And so that's really what we're doing here today. And then the resilience report, which I started talking about last slide and wasn't the right one, but Natasha was here talking about it last week, with all of our flooding this last year, with the heavy rains that we had in the winter. This is more, the urgency is more present than ever. And when I get to our actual list, I'm going to talk a bit about how these projects are currently in our regional plan. But what I really want to point out here is that we were able to identify 3 primary corridors that are most, at risk from sea level rise and need those kinds of resilience investments to maintain mission readiness within our region. So those are Pacific Highway, Harbor Drive, and State Routes 75 and 282. So this is my last slide. Really hoping to have a discussion here today, but wanted to tell you, Kate, and I did as well, but Kate really took a deep dive into all these documents. She put together a really in-depth spreadsheet that I tried to boil down into a couple bullet points, but she has a huge list of projects, a huge list of funding opportunities, but really wanted to spur some conversation as far as some of these projects that as a committee working group that we might want to advance. And I'm looking for your feedback today, and over time we can continue to update this and compare this to the different grant opportunities. So the first one I have listed is Harbor Drive 2.0 Vesta Street Bridge. Andrea Hoff is here, and she will give a presentation later on this item. But this item is initiating the design. This project is currently entering the design phase. And so we'll be looking for opportunities to fund construction of this project. This is a great example of coordination among many different parties We have, of course, the Navy involved in that project from the Vesta Street Bridge perspective in particular, but then also partners from National City, the City of San Diego, SANDAG, Caltrans. It's really a great example of how we can partner to make these really critical projects continue to move forward. The second bullet I have there is the adaptation projects for those identified corridors that we looked at on the last slide. And I did want to mention exactly how these projects are currently in the regional plan. We have, it's a long range document. And this is something that is, as we go and do a lot of outreach and engagement as part of our regional plan, many people get really hung up on the details, but the plan is really a big picture thing. And so as far as resilience and adaptation, we have that right now in the regional plan at a programmatic level. And so we assign funding not for specific corridors, but for the entire region as a program to address sea level rise and wildfire needed adaptation projects. And so implementing these types of projects doesn't necessarily mean that they need to specifically be called out in the regional plan, but we know that these are critical for our military communities. And so, really kind of just level setting and all being in agreement that these are the three biggest corridors gives us that opportunity to move towards implementation and look for money to begin to implement some of those adaptation related improvements. The third bullet talks about improved transit service between Old Town Transit Center and Naval Base Point Loma. This is something that has come up in a lot of our regional plan outreach. It is currently included in the regional plan as a bus rapid transit route. And so while it may take some time to actually implement a full bus rapid transit route, it's not something in the regional plan that's going to be built in a couple of years. It's a little bit further out. Looking for opportunities to do some interim improvements is something we could look at as well. And so currently MTS operates a local bus service in that corridor, but it doesn't really provide a lot of frequency. It's kind of a tripper that just provides kind of the peak commute times. And so looking at ways that we could improve those connections in the interim while SANDAG has the BRT, the bus rapid transit in the long-term vision, either through maybe a micro transit opportunity or just improve frequency on local buses, something that we can continue to look for opportunities to do. Also improve transit service between Coronado and downtown. We also have bus rapid transit in our long range plan connecting Coronado and downtown. And in our unconstrained plan, so our plan that we don't have funding identified for, we do have the ferry service as well. We do know that the ferry really provides a critical piece of that, and it hasn't, the frequency of the ferry has reduced dramatically since COVID. And so we do see that as a shortfall. Unfortunately, it's not, the funding sources that we use to fund bus transit is not something that can fund the ferry. And so it's a little bit challenging, and that's why it's in the unconstrained portion. But I don't like to say that we're not, that because funding is a hurdle, that we're not going to continue to try to address that need. And then finally is low sand corridor improvements. There's quite comprehensive improvements for low sand. It's for those of you that aren't familiar, that's what we call the corridor that Amtrak and the coaster run in that connects San Diego up to Los Angeles and San Luis Obispo. We have a lot of, threats to that corridor from the bluffs that are not stable, both in northern San Diego County and in Orange County as well. And so SANDAG's been undertaking a number of projects to stabilize the bluffs, to look at long-term solutions, which looks at potentially tunneling and taking it away from the coastline. But then also some other improvements that improve frequencies through double tracking and grade separations and things like that. And so we have a robust list of projects included for that corridor. We know that it is part of the priority, I can't remember what it's called, but the Department of Defense priority rail strategy. Not only do people move through this corridor as well, but also a lot of goods do. And I know that as far as providing some of the goods that our military relies on, it's a critical connection, and making sure that it is maintained is very important. And so next steps, we're really looking to get some feedback on that list today, see if you all have projects that we missed. Are there things that we don't think should be included on that list? And then continuing as we meet back in this group to look for those funding opportunities and building kind of a playbook for how we can proactively prepare for those opportunities and partner. And with that, I will see if there are any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you, Danielle. Yeah, I think that your goal today is to say, what's the feedback from the list?
Mhm.
That will help you develop priorities to pursue funding. And then funding will be, well, then who will actually do the work, or what agency will be in charge of the project? Is that kind of where we're trying to land this thing?
Yep. Thank you for summarizing that perfectly.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so members, you see the list up here in front of you. Does anybody have a comment or a question on any particular item? Or is there something that you would like to have up there that you don't see? Tony, I'll start with you.
Thanks. I was curious, I have a question about the adaptation projects. Do you have any specifics on those? It sounds like some of them are conceptual in nature, and then some may actually be in the planning process.
Yeah, no, they're still conceptual in nature. So what we did is as part of the strategy was really just identified the need, that those were the corridors that, were really kind of at risk. So as far as, what there are within that document, and Kate might want to jump in here. I let her go.
So in the development of this list, I pulled together all of the previous studies that had been done, as well as the REPI funding, to try to really start cross-referencing and creating this matrix of what will arise really, and say, okay, well, here are the funding opportunities. Here's how we tag them. There were thousands of projects listed. And so what I did was start pulling out things that really have the most, essentially I geotagged it, so that way what was popping up was thematic. And so all of these, majority of them are in concept. Some of them may have individualized projects that are identified within the regional plan that are already underway within our own, regional assessment, but it's not necessarily tied back to this initiative in a way that would say, hey, yes, this funding is tied to a military, for military working group. It's really actually just a separate project that then plays into a larger corridor. And so majority of these are very conceptual, unless they are very, very specific, and they're quite small in that capacity. And so we can pull it out and do a little bit more of, hey, here's exactly what's being worked on with, or what's planned for those corridors. But I think the reality is what we'd like to do is start to complement these concepts with, like, what does the military actually need versus what we are planning within SANDAG. I hope that answers the question.
I'll add really quickly. So the military resilience framework includes strategies for these types of projects, but doesn't match them specifically up for the corridor. So there's, nature-based strategies, other kind of capital improvements that could address, some of the sea level rise concerns, but they're not matched. So once we got to a point of actually looking at designing a project, those specific types of things would be looked at.
Thank you for explaining that. I think it'd be really helpful if you would be willing to share with the group those strategies, just so that we're aware of what would potentially be considered in the future. But we are certainly supportive of, general projects like that. So, and then I had one other comment, which was the improved transit service. So for Coronado, our council has talked about improving the ferry service not quite a number of times. And so you had made a comment about funding, and there's funding for BRT, but there's not funding that's allocated for ferry service improvements. So can you elaborate on that just a little bit as to why that might be, and if there's some sort of a change in authorizing legislation that would be required to actually make that change so that we could allocate additional funding for ferry service?
That's going to be something I need to look into, and I don't know if any of my transit experts here, but I know if either Beverly or Mary want to jump in, but as far as just I'm not familiar with what is funding the ferry existing as is, and why the frequency reduction has been. But I will say that everything is very like at the federal level, very siloed as far as, you have bus funding for buses, rail funding is for rail. And so having those kind of multimodal, thinking about different modes is not the way the federal Department of Transportation has traditionally operated.
So the city of Coronado currently subsidizes ferry service.
Okay.
So we are part of that equation right now. And I think one of the reasons we've seen a decrease in the number of folks taking part in the ferry is because they continue to escalate costs because not only, is there inflation at work, but they've have a mandate in which they need to switch to electric ferries within some period of time. So that's a huge operational expense in their infrastructure that they've had to bear.
Right.
So those costs have continued to increase, and then some of those costs have been passed along to the ridership. So any ability that we have to attract additional funding to make that more feasible, that might have an impact on increasing the number of folks that are using it.
Awesome.
I think we're going to go to Anna next and then down to David. Beverly, I think MTS, we do have a budget pool for the ferry service. I think we do contribute funds towards that service as well.
Yes, I believe our funds, I believe our funds go to the city, and then the city, obviously it's not all of it, but there are some funds that funnel through the city to the contractor.
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay. So MTS does provide some funding, but not all. So whether it gets shifted from BRT to ferry, that's probably up for discussion at the SANDAG level, I would assume. Okay, Anna and then David.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview of the project priorities. Just a few comments. For the adaptation projects, my understanding is that we pulled projects from the military installation resilience study that we did 2 years. And we actually really based that off of the city of Coronado's sea level rise and adaptation plan. We stole from you quite a bit, and your planner was very involved in all of the adaptation strategies that were identified for the city of Coronado. So we were lucky you guys did that first because we borrowed shamelessly. So that it was fun.
Thank you
so
for clarifying that. I just wanted to make sure those aligned. So it sounds like they do.
That was the goal, was to align. I think it would be great. You had the same question I did, is what is the fiscal constraint or the regulatory constraint for using public funds for the ferry? My understanding is that ferry funding comes from the state and then passes down to our local government. Maybe there's a state solution we can pursue to make that funding more flexible for future use to address that. And I think one thing that we might add for all of us is perhaps looking at more micro mobility options for this priority project list. That's all I have. Just thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Yeah, the micromobility is a good thing to consider because even as we have clusters of military housing in Murphy Canyon or out in Lakeside or other places, if there's an opportunity to take, and I know that the military schedules are all over the clock in sense, but if you can move a chunk who are leaving at a certain time and have a finish time at a certain time, a micro transit would be a definite good thing for their life to not have to sit in traffic as well. Okay, David, comments.
Thank you. I have two comments. So one is Scripps Institution of Oceanography had done a study at Naval Base Coronado with respect to climate change and sea level rise. And I'm wondering if you have adequate data along all the corridors that you're talking about to support your case. And if not, perhaps leaning on Scripps might be an option. And I used to work with them, so I know who you can get help from. That's number one. Number two, I've done a lot of REPI work in other geographic areas, and I recommend, if you haven't already in your spreadsheet, include the criteria that's required. It's one thing to want a project, but if you don't meet the criteria, it's like no hope in getting it. And so we ought to focus on the projects that have the best chance of meeting the criteria and being selected. Thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, David. I also wanted to remind you all about the airport connection. That's a project someday, and whether it's getting new recruits from the airport out to MCRD via airport connector or something, what would you need, or are you set because you have your own transportation, or would you like to use the airport connector to do something else? I'd encourage you to include that project in your thinking about military integration. Tony.
I just wanted to add one other comment to what Anna had said about micro-mobility projects. So if we do add that to the list, which we're entirely supportive of doing that, it's not just a question of getting folks to and from a particular city, but it's also, once you're there, getting around that city. So Coronado just introduced an electric shuttle program. It's a pilot program that's underway through the beginning of December. And so far it's going really well, and there's lots of ridership. But funding that is definitely expensive. So making sure that we've got money allocated to look at those types of transportation projects within a geographic area too, I think is really important, and maybe even with that on the basis.
Good comment. Anna, I thought I remember you saying that military members get some kind of like a transportation allowance as part of their living package
So
or
if
something?
you're a federal employee or, a DOD employee, you, as part of your federal benefits, you are able to receive what we call TIP, Transportation Incentive Program funding. And it basically will subsidize your transit pass. Or van pool. So a lot of our employees do use the TIP program and are eligible for those free transit benefits.
And would the small shuttle, a micro shuttle in Coronado, would that qualify for those funds, for instance?
Not sure that it does. I would need to look into it more, and I'll come back and get that answer. I'm not sure that it does, and I think micromobility might be moving faster than the Transit Incentive Program, but I will check and find out.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Steve, I'll add to that.
Yeah.
Currently our electric shuttle is free, so there's no cost to it for ridership. So that makes it really easy, but that's not to say that it's going to continue that way, because it is a pilot program, and we might actually want folks to contribute something to those rides. So
good to know. Beverly.
Yes, I just had one minor comment. These are obviously much larger projects that might already be included in one of the adaptation projects, but I had mentioned a couple of meetings ago about a request we get from military members for the Silver Strand Training Complex. There's a pair of potential bus stops there that we get requests for, but we cannot serve the area right now because there's no infrastructure there. So it might already be included as one of the projects within item number 2, but it would just be essentially just sidewalk, crosswalks, and signal modification. So it seems like a much smaller scale project. So it might already be contained in there, but I just want to make sure that that didn't get overlooked.
And when we say infrastructure, we're talking about just like the concrete pad for a shelter or
Correct. Yeah.
or a bench or something like
Yeah,
that.
it's just right now there's nowhere for us to really stop and drop passengers off. So we can't just drop them off in the middle of the street and have them run across it. It's essentially a highway. So there's a crosswalk on the north side, but that's also a turn lane. So we can't legally stop there. And then it's not the configuration of the intersection right now won't allow us to serve the stop.
So it sounds like MTS is willing to
Absolutely
provide transportation at that location.
we drive right by. It's very unfortunate that we can't stop. So we absolutely are supportive of stopping there once the infrastructure is in place.
And I think I see a lot of housing at that location, to both leave that location as well as to come back to that location. Good. Any other comments? Mike?
This is a question, I think, for Danielle and Kate. Is what we have here predicated on the 2019 data?
We're talking about the long-range plan?
Mm-hmm.
No, it is updated since then. It's
Okay.
kind of been iterative.
The reason I ask is that I have heard from some folks who work with Anna that traffic volumes at the bases are much higher than they were the last time we did a regional plan, and I didn't know if we are compensating for that, if we're updating that.
We're looking at the latest.
Okay, Ben?
Just a quick question on the prioritization methodology that you all used. Did it consider any of the sort of value capture efforts that have been going on in other parts of SANDAG, those discussions, just in terms of the nexus with housing and items like safety? And then, kind of along those lines, you've got the SANDAG Vision Zero action plan. If you could align and see where those adaptation projects might align with the action plan, that would be a good way to maybe prioritize efforts and kind of do a 2-for-1 approach.
I like that. I think, as to your first comment, it was like a less formal prioritization. We didn't really have criteria. It was what we've heard come up a lot. But that's why we wanted to get the feedback from this group. That the second part with the Vision Zero and connecting, I think that's great. You had a first part of the first comment that you made. Can you remind me what you said about?
Yeah.
The land value capture.
Yeah, land value capture is part of, the ongoing efforts to collaborate between jurisdictions and housing and to really promote projects that have the best chance at having those mutually beneficial benefits.
Right. And I also think as far as looking at funding some of this stuff, I think value capture is a good opportunity. And I'm hoping for some of the kind of microtransit future, because we have a lot of these things that are really clear winners that don't have easy funding sources. I'm hoping that that's a direction that we can look towards.
Okay, good. Any other comments, questions? Okay, Danielle, Kate, did you get what you were looking for out of this agenda item?
Absolutely.
2 thumbs up, 2 okays? Sounds good. All right, thanks for the presentation. All right, before we leave, I'm going to check with Tessa and see if we have any public comments on this item.
Thank you, Chair. We do have one public comment on item 3. Cesar Javier, please come to the podium.
May we request that we will give our input after all the presentations, so it will be lumped into one subject, sir.
You want to give one input after all the items are heard today? Oh, okay. Well. Oh, okay. We'll do it after the end of this. Okay, we'll hear your comments at the end of all the agenda items. Okay, moving on to item number 4, SANDAG Advanced Air Mobility Strategy. This one's kind of interesting, kind of really futuristic from forward-looking. SANDAG received the Caltrans planning grant to develop an advanced air mobility strategy. The technology for moving goods and people using autonomous vehicles is rapidly advancing. Looks like the Jetsons will be here before we know it. The aim of this study is to be proactive and prepare the region from a policy and infrastructure perspective to make sure when the technology is deployed, it is done in a way that contributes to our climate, equity, and other goals. So this one, I'm going to pass back to Kate, who is going to talk more about this item. Yours.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me today, and thank you for enabling me to chat about advanced air mobility. For those of you who've heard this presentation in the past, I will try to keep it as informal as possible. I know this is a highly technical presentation. I believe most people in the room have actually heard it, and so we'll go through the presentation, but please do feel free to hop in with any questions, especially as I go along. I'd prefer this to be somewhat more discussion-based rather than just me talking at you. So. I'm a senior regional planner here at SANDAG. I spent the last 8 years working in next generation technologies, specifically aviation and AI in some capacity. And so I'm eager to discuss advanced air mobility, especially how we're looking at it here at SANDAG. SANDAG is exploring advanced air mobility as second wave adopter alongside our partners at the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority through the Caltrans planning grant that will help prepare our region for AAM integration. As a long-range planning organization, we recognize the importance of preparation after many lessons learned from bike shares, scooters, car shares. So we want to make sure that we are readily prepared for this technology as it moves through its certification process with the Federal Aviation Administration. So Advanced Air Mobility 101, again, some of you may have heard this and I don't want to be too redundant, so I will try to move through this fairly quickly, but again, open for any questions you may have. What is advanced air mobility? Advanced air mobility is an evolving market within the aerospace industry. It uses a novel aircraft for the transport of people, freight, emergency services. The vehicles range from the idea of air taxis, which you can see in the top photo, to drone delivery services here at the bottom. Since the early 1950s, the technology has actually been conceptualized and spoken about time and time again. And we're finally seeing early deployments for commercial operations throughout the United States and across the globe. Some of the earliest markets that are fully commercialized are in Dallas, Texas. We have a few delivery opportunities as well in North Carolina and Virginia. But some of the drone programs that we've done right here in San Diego are the most exciting because these have actually probably touched your backyards and maybe you don't even know about it. Back in 2019, I worked alongside Uber Elevate as well as Chula Vista, City of Chula Vista and the City of Coronado to coordinate an Uber Eats delivery from from Chula Vista over to Coronado. We delivered chicken nuggets to one of the former council members. We looked very closely actually with North Island to make sure that that happened. There was a lot of deconfliction initiatives that needed to make sure that we were not infringing on their airspace. We also needed to ensure that there was a lot of support. So we provided them the situational awareness that enabled them to want to partake in this. We've also done a lot of work with MCAS Miramar in order to make sure that drone delivery can be used for not only smart bases, but also smart battlefield initiatives. So some of this directly relates back to some of the work that you all are doing within the military realm. So regional air mobility is the concept of intercity or regional destinations. You're looking at something up to 190 miles. We may look at this from something like Los Angeles down to San Diego, right? How do we kind of move people from larger regional hubs to another regional hub? So this may actually be something like Camp Pendleton down to MCAS Miramar, just to expeditiously move some people around. Urban air mobility is the concept of around 30 miles. So you're thinking more of like if we have an organ that potentially comes into the San Diego International Airport, can we leverage a drone delivery service to expedite that to a hospital and make sure that that bypasses any potential congestion or traffic? We also have the use of small uncrewed aircraft systems. We have seen those. Those are deployed actually right now in Chula Vista. If you have seen the drone as a first responder program, we're seeing a lot of UAS deployed in these smaller urban environments to try to see what other use cases we can leverage for them. So beyond just cargo, they're also providing some services. This is an incredibly complex arena. You can see here, there are so many considerations that go into advanced air mobility. The first is the aircraft. The aircraft is heavily regulated through the Federal Aviation Administration. All of the aircraft will go through certification processes through our regulators. The primary stakeholder group who's most interested in your aircraft are generally going to be your original equipment manufacturers or your service providers, right? Think your airlines who will be buying these aircraft. So of course, for them, this is their primary consideration. We work alongside of our OEMs as well as our operators to really understand and ascertain what type of infrastructure we will need to deploy to start supporting the aircraft. But of course, this is not a primary consideration of SANDAG as we are not involved in any sort of understanding of the actual aircraft. Airspace, of course, again, this is not really within the purview of SANDAG overall, but we want to understand how we can make sure that we are appropriately addressing deconfliction initiatives. And again, that we're supporting via whatever infrastructure may enable this to be a seamless integration process. So again, this is very well regulated by our federal regulators, our air traffic control, and our service providers. Again, this is something that will be very, very important for them because they need to make sure that they're getting the situational awareness out to other airspace operators, i.e. our military service folks. What's most important in the purview of SANDAG is the supporting infrastructure and policy components, which is why it's highlighted here. We recognize that we need to start planning today in order to make sure, again, that we have a seamless process moving forward. So this includes understanding what type of infrastructure groundwork we need to be laying today, right? So if we need to make sure that we're deploying more energy assets, what does that look like? If fiber needs to be laid so that we ensure that there's a data connection, we need to make sure that we're identifying projects early and often. We recognize that there are going to be many considerations that come down the pipeline with infrastructure, goes beyond land use and permitting and ordinances. We need to understand, security. And so these things are, again, this is phase one. So we're just trying to really understand the basis of how we need to be looking at this, and who owns what is another thing that SANDAG is really concerned about. So in terms of airspace, again, this is not within generally the purview of SANDAG, but we do recognize that certain parts of airspace will have, kind of a localized understanding. And so part of this is just ensuring that we are getting public awareness and perception out there. We need to ensure that our residents and constituents understand airspace ownership, right? The Federal Aviation Administration owns the airspace. And so oftentimes there's a lot of conflict that comes up maybe with miscommunications with homeowners or business owners about people flying within the airspace. Noise and privacy has come up quite a bit within this arena. We recognize that these will be issues that we will need to be cognizant of as we engage with the public and many of our stakeholders. And deconfliction, again, while this will not be within the purview of SANDAG, we want to ensure that we are providing all of our stakeholders the resourcing that they will need in order to make sure that they're having the conversation, so that when these vehicles enter the airspace, everyone is prepared, they have what they need, and they have the situational awareness for what's flying in the sky around them. And this is really the meat and bones of our project and where I get super excited. Averta what? So I'm sure many of you have heard of a heliport. We were talking about helicopters earlier today. A heliport will lay the groundwork for a vertiport. Vertiport infrastructures are concepts that are meant to accommodate AAM infrastructure. Think of an electrified heliport or a vertiport, essentially. It just provides you that fully integrated ability for these aircraft to land, to charge, to get the data access that they need, and to take off more expeditiously as well. You would look at a VertiHub very similar to a transportation investment zone, and essentially the only difference is that we can now accommodate this vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. So, you're still getting your last mile options that can tie back to your middle mile option, which would be the AAM infrastructure. So SANDAG's AAM strategy, again, we are in phase one, just very much trying to lay the groundwork and really understand what will be necessary for regional integration. We want to establish our vision, which we have, and you can find that in the supporting documentation under the guiding principles. We also want to just kind of ascertain what are the largest hurdles, right? How are we going to make sure that we're prepping all of our infrastructure? What's the gap analysis that we need to do? How do we start filling those gaps in today? And then how do we ensure that our plan is making it into the right hands so that our local jurisdictions, as well as our other regional partners, are ready to start their planning preparations, right? We very much recognize here at SANDAG that we are responsible to help start planning, but this network doesn't end at our jurisdictional boundary. So we need to ensure that there's interoperability within our plans. And this way we are all speaking to each other. We're all coordinating on these initiatives. And when the vehicles get rolled out, they have a point A and a point B that may not be within our jurisdictional boundary, but you are also able to land your aircraft wherever you may need. We want to make sure that we have everything going into CEQA and NEPA in terms of any implications that may be different from the process that we understand it to be today, right? When you start to enter into things like aviation, things become a little different. They're a little bit more nuanced. And especially when you start talking about an emerging technology, our federal partners, as you well know, sometimes they're a little bit further behind than in the technology, right? So that the regulatory process doesn't always keep up with the technology. Some of the deliverables that have already come down the pipeline, we have completed an internal industry and market assessment. This is an ongoing document, so this is a living document. We put this into a Power BI dashboard so that as new white papers come down the pipeline, we can read them, input them here. Again, I think I mentioned geotagging. You can all find that I'm someone who likes to maintain a very centralized repository of all information. I like to geotag things so that as themes come up, we can just inquiry those themes and we really understand, if safety is one of them, let's make sure we can pull a report specifically about safety. We have completed our AAM collaborative guiding principles. We continue to maintain our collaborative that's made up of about 25 to 30 different stakeholders that are both regional stakeholders and then our OEM and operator stakeholders that will go until March 2025. The next steps, our regional policy framework, our implementation strategy, and our stakeholder and public engagement strategy, these will come out as one report. These are all being diligently worked on today, and they are set to be delivered by December, which is a little bit ahead of the timeline, but what we're hoping to do is make sure that we have a full documentation package that we can then provide for feedback and make sure that everything within these documents is has the feedback that we need in order to go into phase 2 and really understand what that's going to look like, and that we haven't missed anything coming out of this first phase approach. And so that is the AAM project at a very, very high level, but I'm happy to discuss it with anyone who may have some questions.
Okay, thanks, Kate. Before we go on to member comments, let's check and see if there's any other public comments for this item.
There are no other public comments on this.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting project, because the military installations, I can see not only do you have operational things to do your mission, but you have residents who are service members on the base who want Amazon deliveries, who want medication, who want meals. And so now we have this intersection of base operations with base security, with lifestyle. I think, let's go back to slide 8, which had a lot of good things to consider. And I guess that's what Kate would love to hear from you on out of this meeting, whether it's right now or you take time to kind of think about it, is as you look at some of these items, are there places where, hey, we don't want drones flying over Miramar or Coronado, North Island or Pendleton, or, what are some restrictions that you see that you need to communicate to Kate as far as, well, okay, this is fine, but we can't have this thing affect us this way. And that's the kind of feedback you're looking for, aren't you?
Yeah, some of that. And also, how do we work together in order to move forward, right? We recognize that counter UAS is going to be of heavy importance for the Department of Defense. It has been for some time, especially around UAS. So we want to make sure that we are getting your input in terms of what types of security measures are most appropriate, and how do we make sure that we are tying back into you all and getting your expertise to make sure that we're getting the best outcomes within this plan.
Okay, with that, any comments, questions? Anna.
I have a few comments and a question. I think on slide 6, you had state and local government down as stakeholders. I really think that federal entities need to be added into that. I know you coordinate through the FAA, but there are a large number of federal stakeholders in this region that need to be coordinated with as well. And I would add, in addition to privacy, airspace ownership, and noise, I would add security as a general concern. And then my question is, how have you coordinated with DoD prior to today's meeting?
Yes, we have sent invitations out to a few of the folks from the Tech Bridge, at MCAS Miramar. We've done some work with them in the past, having had some commercial drone experience. So they've been invited to all of our collaborative meetings. Unfortunately, it's just hard to get people to be able to have that time commitment quarterly by quarterly. So our table is always open. And if anyone would like to join every quarter, we would love to have you.
Yeah, I would recommend reaching out, in addition to Miramar, to the other military air stations in the region, and making sure that our region air operations are included. that Commander Naval Air Forces are able have a chance to review that, and then as well as FACSFAC, the airspace coordinator for the Navy. And we can put you in contact. I'm just slightly concerned that we're not getting involved holistically early on so that we can give you concerns, because I feel like December is just around the corner. But I definitely appreciate you coming to the military working group and giving us this overview. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments, questions?
Yeah, so JJ Gamlin from Marine Corps Installations West. So two aspects of this, I think. So there is the whole concept process, stakeholder alignment in like integration or deconfliction, right? So that's just airspace, that's moving things, and whether that's on an installation or off, same challenge. But there's, as Anna brought up, there's another aspect of this, which is what we call mission assurance, right? So that's really the national security aspect of having something that potentially can be deconflicted or integrated. But the real question is, do we know, and this goes to the technology of the system, where's that coming from? And then it comes down to access. So you did allude to the fact from a regulatory standpoint, and if we just use the FAA, regulation doesn't lead technology, technology leads kind of regulation, right? So I would take that to an nth degree when you look at, as we look at protecting installations. So an aspect of that is, quite frankly, how do we keep things out first? And then there might be a piece, how do we integrate things in? So you mentioned counter UAS technology. So as we are on the forefront of actually operationalizing that concept, with technology or systems that can do that, I think all about having the stakeholder conversations, we'd be happy to do it. But where we are on that timeline, I would say you all are probably much further along in conceptual thought and development for integration and operations. Over.
Thank you.
Good comments. Others?
I just had one comment and one question. What is, this is relatively new to me, and I think we all know, we knew this issue is coming forward. So it's exciting and a little bit scary at the same time. Just thinking about some of the feedback that we'll sure get from our residents. I'm wondering what the ability is of local governments to control that airspace. I know the FAA is the primary driver of that. And it looks like by this diagram, it's 150 feet in the air, that perhaps a landowner has control of the airspace over their property.
That's
Is that correct? Okay. And so I'm just wondering about that regulatory framework that you had mentioned and what is possible and what maybe is totally in the hands of the FAA.
Yes, and I apologize. I should have been clearer on this. So the FAA actually fully regulates the airspace. There is really no local regulatory role. Part of the reason we have this up is to help provide background for our local jurisdictions to really understand the ways in which they can help support that role, which is really just public awareness, public education, and making sure that these conversations between stakeholders are being had. So that way our federal partners can go back to the FAA and they can work together to say, hey, there may be still some national security issues that we have, right? So we're garnering all of this information and we'll provide this back to some of our FAA stakeholders who will then go back and start to address certain things. Unfortunately, there really are not many things that we can do to regulate the airspace on a state or local level, except for provide situational awareness, which is what we're hoping to do, and just to make sure that people do have that awareness. And unfortunately, it's not always the most exciting part of the role to have these conversations with homeowners or business owners, but of course, it just falls back to the federal regulator, and so we allow it to be what it is.
So just make one comment, which is Coronado has a number of special events that takes place, including firework displays.
Yeah.
So that is something that we'll want to build into your consideration. So.
Okay, others? It's an exciting advancement in technology, and you raise a good point about the infrastructure. Does there need to be cable? Does there need to be energy? Does there need to be communications? And who's going to coordinate that and manage that? Is it done per agency, or is it done at a regional level? It's all very important things. We used drone technology for the first time in law enforcement. Well, not the first time, in an arrest for the first time. A couple of weeks ago, there was a suspect in a Target store who went and took a suitcase out of the luggage section, loaded up a bunch of stuff in the store, including 7 cases of Red Bull. And the store security called the police department, who had other priorities going at the moment. But we went to the top of the police department, which has a view over the whole city, pretty much 90%. And they sent the drone over, and the drone followed the suspect out the store, out the parking lot, into the community. And the drone followed the suspect at a height that he couldn't hear or be aware. And eventually a police car became free and was directed towards the suspect. And they found and identified the suspect through the clothing and things. So it is an emerging technology. And I could see even fire services using it to get early intelligence on fires. I could potentially even military bases could use it for intra-base uses, as well as enforcement or detection of things before people can get there. So it's an exciting technology. Privacy is a concern. Security is a concern. Confliction is a concern. So it'll be an interesting discussion going forward. Good.
Thank you. We love the challenge here.
That sounds great. Okay, that is it for item number 4. Let's go on to item number 5, Harbor Drive 2.0 Investa Street Bridge update. I think this is going to be Andrea and Christina. And you're going to give us an update on this item and next steps. When you're ready, go ahead and start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Goebel and military working group members. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Andrea Hoff. I'm a project manager here at SANDAG. I am the project manager for the Harbor 2.0 Vesta Street Bridge project network of projects. I'll introduce Christina No, who's the project manager on the Caltrans side. And then we have several key team members as well. Jose Luis Robles, the design manager, and Aldiv Divino Gracia, our project engineer. So I'll summarize the network of projects that we're excited to provide a little bit of information on today. Not a whole lot of new information. I'm sure you're familiar with these projects, but some updates. So the Harbor Drive 2.0 and Vesta Street Bridge projects consist of what you see here outlined in purple, are proposed dedicated truck lanes and intelligent transportation system elements such as freight signal prioritization. That's signal improvements that would enable trucks to move forward at a green light ahead of other traffic, as well as queue jumps, new traffic signals, and wayfinding control gantries. And those are those overhead signage structures where we can dynamically identify different lanes for different types of traffic. In addition, we're proposing freeway ramp improvements to access the freeway from Harbor Drive, the Vesta Street Bridge, which is a new grade separation for Navy Base San Diego to connect the wet and dry sides of Navy Base San Diego, and rehabilitation of various intersections where the pavement has become degraded. As I mentioned, it's a network of projects, and we sort of bundled them together to secure funding for design and right-of-way phases. I'd like to remind everyone of the project purpose, which is multiple. You'll see on the left in blue the designated truck route for the working waterfront. identified on the map. And in red, those are streets that are restricted for trucks. So the idea overall of Harbor 2.0 is to incentivize use of the dedicated truck route between the marine terminals for trucks to access the freeways and keep the trucks from intermingling with the local neighborhood streets. You may be familiar, the Barrio Logan community has a long-standing burden of safety issues with trucks because of the mixture of land uses. There's residential and industrial, and the working waterfront is a very complex area with a lot of diverse interests, including folks that are living there. So we'd like to improve community safety, prioritize safe access to transit and active transportation. There's a MTS trolley route in this corridor and stations, enhance freight and community mobility between the working waterfront, the I-5 and the State Route 15, improve mobility and multimodal connectivity for naval-based personnel while reducing congestion. And with that, we're speaking of Vesta Street Bridge. As I mentioned, rehabilitate degraded pavement. And we'd like to point out that this project, Harbor 2.0 in particular, is identified in the local community emissions reduction program plan that the community has worked on. It's goal number 9. So a lot of stakeholders and a lot of support. It's important to understand the corridor history, and there's probably milestones on here that aren't listed, but here are a few. This project actually goes all the way back to 2008. And moving forward, the port had accepted safety loop funding and then dedicated that funding for a study called the Harbor Drive Multimodal Corridor Study, HDMCS. That was in 2016. And then through 2017 through 2019, the various stakeholders in the area, SANDAG, the cities of San Diego, National City, Caltrans, Metropolitan Transit System, and the Navy participated on the Technical Advisory Committee for that study. In 2019, that study was completed and port staff was directed to proceed with the Harbor 2.0 technology improvements. Moving on to 2020, an MOU was signed among the various partners to keep collaborating on these projects. And in 2021, the Vesta Street Bridge in particular began its environmental phase, and the Harbor Drive ITS component began its project initiation, and that's where it was identified as a goal as part of the SERP. In 2022, the project initiation document was completed for Harbor Drive. 2023, we moved both projects into the environmental phase. So memorandums of understanding were signed with the various stakeholders, and the project report and environmental clearance were completed. The projects were bundled for the environmental phase. This was key to securing the funding that we've since secured for design. And a big piece of getting that funding was completing that environmental document by the end of 2023. And Caltrans led that effort. It was done in record time and completed in order to secure the funding we currently have. So now here we are, ready to begin design and right-of-way phases for both projects. We are a very integrated team, Caltrans and SANDAG. Our new CEO, Mario Orso, was very involved when he was at Caltrans in these projects and continues to be. And even though he's moved over, we still have a contingent at Caltrans working closely with us. So this identifies the various sort of lead agencies. For Vesta Street Bridge, the implementing agency is Caltrans. For the Harbor Drive design component, the implementing agency is SANDAG. In both cases, the right-of-way and design lead is also SANDAG. But as you can see for Harbor Drive, given the experience that the Caltrans team has with civil infrastructure, they'll be participating in the civil design. So although SANDAG's leading it, we have the team at Caltrans, actually, Aldiv, in fact, creating various scenarios as the project engineer. And then, of course, the reviewing agencies. We're looking at a 2 to 3 year design phase. So we're really just kicking off this phase. Here are some of the project elements, again, for Harbor Drive. I'll go through these quickly and then I'll turn it over to Christina. She's going to talk a little bit about some progress that's been made on the Vesta Street Bridge. I mentioned the freight signal prioritization. You can see on the right-hand side of the screen, some of the intersections sort of with circles on them that have been identified as potential for that freight signal prioritization. The idea being to move trucks quicker along the corridor. This sometimes requires a queue jump, which is an infrastructure improvement that allows the truck to bypass some of the other traffic ahead of the traffic. In some portions of the corridor, we've identified truck-only lanes, and those are off-peak, like could be changed for use by autos or trucks. The dedicated truck lanes are ones that would be dedicated for only trucks, and it varies down the corridor. We're also promising to provide some zero-emission charging infrastructure, location to be determined. There are challenges with this project, challenges and opportunities, which is what excites me moving forward, trying to kind of really figuring out solutions to some complex situations in the corridor. You can see this configuration on the left is part of the environmental document. You can kind of get an idea. The number 1 is a truck-only lane. In this case, number 2 is a truck-only lane during non-peak hours. That wayfinding gantry. So that's sort of a conceptual image. But one of the things that we want to ensure during design is that travel times are improved for trucks, but also not degraded for other users. So I view that as a complexity. Our first order of business is a microsimulation and traffic study that's going to take a comprehensive look at the corridor to ensure that the queue jumps and the different signal timings actually do what they're intended to do. There's at-grade rail crossings, which complicates many of those intersections, and we'll be very cognizant of that moving forward. In addition to the need to coordinate with other ongoing projects, we have the Bayshore Bikeway, which is 75% complete on this corridor, and ensuring that that construction project works well on the truck route is absolutely needed. We've been participating in the Bayshore Bikeway meetings with Captain Healy and his team, and we'll continue to do that. We even have some action items that we're following up with to ensure that coordination. There's also a variety of jurisdictions, National City and the City of San Diego, who are anticipated to own these traffic signals and manage them. But it's hard to imagine how 2 different jurisdictions can manage one system. So that's another element that we're going to have to look at to ensure it's successful in the end. And then you'll see on the left in the image, a median without any landscaping. Some of the conceptual layouts do remove landscaping from the median and then put landscaping in a different part of the corridor. This is a sensitive topic for residents and other users. And we would like to ensure that sort of these small community wins, urban greening, whatever it might be, that we can identify those to really create a solution that's acceptable to all parties. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christina, who will talk a little bit more about Vesta Street Bridge.
Thank you, Andrea. So yes, I will go over the Vesta Street Bridge project elements. So as Andrea mentioned, it will be a newly constructed bridge structure that connects the wet side of the Naval Base San Diego at Cummings Road to the dry side all the way to Norman Scott Road. And this bridge will cross over several jurisdictions. That includes the City of San Diego, BNSF Railroad, and the MTS Trolley. So since there are several agencies involved, there is going to be a lot of coordination needed throughout the design, right-of-way, and construction phases. This bridge features multimodal aspects. Running along the north side of the bridge is a sidewalk for pedestrians, and there will also be a class 4 bike lane on either side of the bridge. There will be 1 lane in each direction of travel, and another lane in the center, which will be a managed lane. And this managed lane will be in the direction of heavier traffic depending on the peak hour and the time of day. So this managed lane will be enforced with overhead gantry structure. And tentatively, there will be 3 of them, one on either ends of the bridge and one at the center. And this overhead gantry will have an electronic display above each lane that shows which direction travel is permitted. To further enforce the managed lane, it is proposed to have some type of channelizers or pop-up bollards, which will separate the lanes of opposing traffic. This technology has not been set in stone yet. We're still exploring which technology will be optimal to enforce the managed lane. Just to emphasize that with the construction of this Vesta Street Bridge, it will facilitate circulation and connectivity in this corridor so that Navy personnel and residents will not have to leave the base. And this will effectively reduce traffic congestion at Naval Base San Diego gates and adjacent intersections. Okay, and another project feature for Vesta Street Bridge is the widening at southbound State Route 15 off-ramp to Main Street. So currently this off-ramp is a singular lane with a shared left turn and right turn movement. With the widening of this off-ramp, there will be 2 lanes, a dedicated left turn lane and then another lane for the left and right turn shared movements. So this new lane configuration to accommodate the extra left turns is for trucks that we anticipate will be turning left onto Main Street and heading down south to use the newly constructed Vesta Bridge. Also, so the white hatching that you see is where the ramp will be widened, and the red hatching is where we will be doing some pavement rehabilitation to improve the condition of the ramp. And also, as you can see on the upper left-hand corner, we will be upgrading a ADA curb ramp and also a drainage inlet. And with the widening, it also includes a relocation of a traffic signal. And then in addition to the pavement rehabilitation that I mentioned at that off-ramp, there are 3 other locations. This includes location at Harbor Drive and 32nd Street, Vesta Street and Main Street, and also on the eastern side of the Vesta Street Bridge. So to further explore the bridge alternatives, so in the previous environmental phase, we explored 2 alternatives. The first one is the cast-in-place bridge alternative, and this is a 2-span bridge of equal lengths, 263 feet, with an anticipated structure depth of 10.75 feet. And as you can see, since it's 2 spans, if you look at the image, there is a bent and 2 columns in the center of the bridge. And the profile for this bridge would be around almost 10% on the wet side and 8% on the dry side. And the advantage of this cast-in-place bridge alternative is that since there's only a singular bent in the center, there would be less underground utility impacts between Harbor Drive and McCandless Boulevard. And another advantage is that with the cast-in-place alternative, it allows for bridge cells within the bridge, so utilities could be relocated throughout the bridge. And the other alternative that was explored is the precast girder alternative. And we are exploring this alternative more in the design phase. It is a 4-span bridge with varying lengths and an anticipated structure depth of 6.5 feet. The profile of this would be around 6% on either side. And we are moving towards this alternative for several reasons. One of the reasons is that it has a flatter grade than the cast in place. It is the less expensive option. And it is also preferred by BNSF since there is no false work that would be needed and crossing over the BNSF and MTS railways. And to go along with the bridges, there are 2 types of walls that are being considered to hold the embankments. The first one is a type 1 retaining wall. And the second one is mechanically stabilized earth or MSE walls. And we are exploring more the MSE wall option because there is a reduced utility impacts since there are no steel driven piles that are needed compared to the type 1 retaining walls. So we haven't moved full steam ahead with either of these alternatives since we still need to have several meetings with the Naval Base San Diego just to ensure that they're okay with moving along with either alternative. And once we have that in place, then we will be working with our structural team at Caltrans to fully flesh out the design. And some Caltrans and Navy agreements that are occurring are, first we have our real estate agreement. So this was actually just signed last week, and this agreement provides Caltrans a license and gives them permission to for certain members to go within the Navy base and conduct environmental and engineering studies that are needed. It will also be helpful for our surveying crew to enter the Navy base and collect data that will be essential for us to do the design. Next, we have a letter of support that the Navy is working on. So this letter of support, we had one in the environmental phase, so this one will just be specifically moving forward for the design and right-of-way phase. And this just establishes continued support and collaboration of the Navy for this Vesta Street Bridge, and will hopefully facilitate conversations that are needed when we present our design so that the Navy can provide input. And lastly, this is a future agreement that will tentatively be happening. It's an operations and maintenance agreement. So this will be to establish ownership and maintenance responsibilities of the Vesta Street Bridge post-construction. But yes, the first step would be the letter of support, and then we will be working on the operations and maintenance agreements in the future. And now I will pass this back to Andrea.
Thank you. I think I misspoke earlier. Caltrans is leading the design for Vesta Street Bridge, in case I got that mixed up. The schedule right now, both projects are kind of in parallel. That's not to say that that couldn't change in the future. Vesta Street Bridge, we're looking at potential funding opportunities for construction currently, so that one might move a little quicker. But you can see the draft schedule here with the approval of the environmental document, the end of 2023. 2024, we were able to secure the 18.5 million in Trade Corridor Enhancement Program funds, which is funding the design for both projects. The Port of San Diego has agreed and provided 2.2 million of matching funds for that grant. And then we were recently awarded another 11 million from the federal government to fully fund right-of-way and design for the entire network. Right now is where we are. We're initiating our design procurements. That includes the traffic study I mentioned and micro simulation and design coordination team. We will also be likely using our on-call ITS consultants for the concept of operations, and then we will need experts in right-of-way. So all of that happening now with anticipated the next 2 years, project development teams meeting, an iterative design process, coordination with other projects, and outreach to the community. Finally, 2026 through 2028, we'd like to identify the delivery method and identify that construction funding and begin construction. That's a snapshot as of now. And that's it for our presentation. We'd be happy to answer questions.
Okay, before we get to David going first, let's just check and see if there's any other public comments.
We do have Cesar Javier who would like to speak on items 3, 4, and 5.
And we'll get to that after this item. So this would be public comment just for this specific item.
I do not have public comment just for this.
Okay, so I'm going to have you wait till we finish with this specific item. Thank you. Okay, David.
Thank you for that presentation. I was just curious, infrastructure that's built on base has ATFP requirements, anti-terrorism force protection. Does that apply to the bridge? Does that criteria apply to the bridge?
I don't think we have gotten to that phase in the design yet, but this is something that we will be discussing with the military as we start to have recurring coordination meetings. Thank you for bringing that up.
It could significantly impact the design, so.
Sounds good. You're probably the right person with your military and engineering background to certainly add some comments. So encourage you to reach out to both of those project managers as we go along with questions or anything. Tony.
Yeah, just a question about the timeline. You had mentioned some of the challenges of making sure that all the traffic signal coordination takes place between the various jurisdictions. I think City of San Diego, National City. I'm curious at what point in the project timeline you're going to be kind of going down that road and doing the coordination with them.
This is the time, the design phase. Yeah, we're just getting our funding in place. It requires some bureaucratic actions. But once we have all of our funding in place, that's when we kick into high gear. And that micro simulation will look at the operation of the signals. And we need to have ongoing conversations about the eventual turnover to those jurisdictions and the overarching management and what that looks like.
I'll just mention that we have regular ongoing meetings with Caltrans because of the 75 going through Coronado, and they just mentioned to us last month that they're going to be investigating different traffic control signal software programs for them to utilize. And so we're working with them to possibly synchronize on the same system. And so if there's the ability for us to do a regional RFP with those other cities in Caltrans for the traffic signalization software, we'd certainly be open to that.
Thank you.
Okay,
other questions, comments? Okay, Andrea, Christina, Anna?
Oh, I just wanted to thank you. Thank SANDAG and Caltrans for your coordination with the Navy on this project. It's a huge project and crosses many jurisdictions. So thank you for the coordination.
Yeah, good, well said. Andrea, Christina, thank you for taking the time to present the project. You are definitely in the know on this one, and we appreciate your work. Thank you. Okay, at this time, I'll take the final public comment, sir. Well, you're welcome to come up and speak. You said you had some comments on items 3, 4, and 5, and you've got 2 minutes, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, SANDAG, for the free matriculation. This is my doctoral degree dissertation. We notice from the grassroots mirror that this is SANDAG's heavy on mobility or circulation. I remember that we have 5 elements in urbanization. We have to consider Mother Earth. We have to consider the humans, his shelter. You have to consider the society. We have to consider mobility. And that's, we respect, because that's the federal mandate for SANDAG. And we envy it. We envy it. And we would like to have it in our community as well. I also envy this forum because I learned that the city officials are not here, not represented. I do not see also the Air Pollution Control District. I do not see the EPA, US and the state EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. I only see the glistening stars from the military where we are getting hope for survival. In the discussion, we heard about the seasonal fire, environmental justice. Do we have really clean air? Do we have really clean water? You mentioned about fire, seasonal. It's been there. History. What have we done? Is Carlsbad desalination enough to coop up the need for water, aside from buying it from Colorado? It's a good example. We have plenty of Pacific water to put up the fire. Last one question. How many violations of federal laws
Sir, your
or
time
state
did expire.
we have violated the let me know, let us know, because if that's the solution.
Sir, thank you. Your time has expired. Turn off.
Okay. Thank you for taking the time to attend our meeting, to become interested in the issues that we face, and thank you for your comments. We appreciate those. Okay, any other final member comments before we adjourn? I think we're pretty good for today. You've got a lot of things to think about, a couple of projects related to air and Harbor Drive 2.0 and the priority list. If you think of things, you can contact Danielle or Kate. And I think with that, we are 3 minutes early on time, so we're going to call this meeting adjourned. Have a great rest of the day.